So my general purpose of this research is to analyze Harvard usage of factor race in the admission process to determine the matter of racial discrimination against Asian American applicants. One of the several reasons why this research is important is because it matters with the title of the Civil Rights Act 1964, which shows that it prohibits the discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origins in programs and activities receiving federal financial assistance. It might also impact Harvard and Ivy League colleges, such as Yale, their admission policies. It might also impact general content of affirmative action in future. This is also now changing to the political dispute between liberals and conservatives, judges appointed by Obama administration versus the U.S. Department of Justice, who officially made a support to Students for Fair Admissions. So I assume that Harvard's admission policies intentionally discriminated Asian Americans with hidden racial quotas. And my thesis would be Harvard did not provide a reasonable explanation about appropriate usage of factor race in the admission, considering the relatively low admit rate of Asian American applicants derived from the stark disparity in personal and overall ratings between Asian Americans and other races. So to approach this problem, I decided to review the previous cases to confirm the usage of race and racial quota. These three cases, Regents of the University of California versus Bakke, Rudder versus Bollinger, Fisher versus Texas, these all three cases are related to the affirmative actions in the past. In the decision of all these three cases, the judges defined the appropriate usage of race in admissions for educational benefits coming from diversity. It also prohibited the racial quotas. So I believe looking at these previous cases would help me to figure out the appropriate usage of race and racial quota, which is defined in my hypothesis. I also decided to look at how Harvard's admission policies work. To briefly explain, Harvard scores applicants on a scale 1 to 6, with being 1 best. They can also assign plus or minus, so it could be 2 plus or 2 minus on the ratings. An applicant is generally rated in 4 areas: 1 academic, 2nd extracurricular, 3 athletic, and 4 for the personal ratings. And using these 4 areas, Harvard creates an overall rating which decides the final admission of applicants. If you score 1 on overall rating, you are almost guaranteed for admission. If you receive 2, you still have 80 to 90% of admission, which could be said as a clear admit. If it goes down below 2, you have 20 to 40% admission, which is average, but average in Harvard is considered as a bad. And besides that, 4 and 6, you absolutely have almost no chance to be admitted. So this will be the most important thing for my future slides. I collected the data of measuring the getting 2 or better scores, because that is considered as having good chances to admissions. You also have to know that Harvard has a definite preference to applicants who are recruited athletes, legacies, dean's interest lists, and student who is the children of faculty and staff. I call this ALDC for the future slides. I also think examining the role of the race in Harvard admission process is crucial to prove my hypothesis. I decided to make an analysis on non-ALDC, which is not athletes, legacies, dean's interest list, or child of the faculty applicants by race, because Office of Civil Rights, which is under U.S. Department of Education's finding in 1990, to find that if you want to see whether Asian Americans are discriminated or not, you have to compare the ratings between non-ALDC applicants, because ALDC applicants the treatment of the ALDC applicants does not matter with their race. In more easy words, Harvard admissions do not care if their parents donated money. They don't care if the applicant's skin color is black, yellow, or white. Comparing academic, extracurricular, personal over ratings of applicants by race would give more better understanding to analysis on non-ALDC applicants by race. I also calculated changes in class demographic from models under different admission conditions. For example, such as if there was no Asian penalties, how much % of the Asian in this would increase? If there was no racial preference, how much would other races share would change? These are the sources that I use for the approaches that I mentioned. I use the data regarding individual applicants to Harvard from the classes 2014 through 2019. And general aggregate admissions data from the classes of 2000 to 2019. I also used the deposition transcripts and related exhibits from the Harvard officials, and OIR's report, admitted exhibits and public transcripts of the Students for Fair Admissions and the Harvard case, and expert and rebuttal reports from each experts from each sides. I also used the findings of facts and conclusions of the law of this case, and training materials from the admissions office to see how admission offices evaluate each applicants. So using this first table, I'm trying to answer whether Asian Americans are seen to be discriminated in the Harvard admission generally. The baseline data set includes all the applicants but not ALDC. If you can see, the white has 4.2% rate of being admitted to Harvard, 6.5 for the black people, 5.3 for the Hispanic people, and 4.4% for the Asian Americans, which is much lower than the average of 4.5% in 4.5% admit rate. So trying to see if this lowest admit rate of Asian Americans are reasonable or not, I decided to look at the one of the 4 component ratings, academic, and the other one, extracurricular ratings. If you could see from the average, Asian American has a highest academic rating compared to the other ones, with the 58.58% of having 2 or better scores on the academic rating. Not only in academic, but if you look at the extracurricular, Asian Americans also have the highest probability of getting 2 or better on extracurricular rating, with 26.994%. Throughout this data, I could see if the Asian American admit rate is the lowest, then the problem is not from this academic extracurricular rating. So I moved on to the personal rating, which is another factor that Harvard uses to evaluate an applicant. Now, if you see, this is divided as a personal and alumni personal, because the personal rating is graded by two groups. One is by the admissions office, and one is by the alumni interviewers who actually meet the applicants and have an interview with them. If you look at the admissions office, Asian American has the lowest personal rating, which is 16.76% of getting 2 or higher personal ratings. If you look at the 10 academic index decile, which is one of the smartest people of the whole entire applicants, Asian American has a 20.57% of receiving a 2 or better personal ratings. That is even lower than the 3rd decile of African Americans who has 22% of probability of getting 2 or better personal score. But if you look at the alumni personal, Asian American has 48.55% of receiving 2 or better personal scores, which doesn't seem to be that much different from the top race, white, who has a 48.74% of personal rating. This gave me a suspicion that there's a big disparity between the personal rating given by admissions office and the alumni alumni interviewers. This continues onto the overall ratings. Overall rating is also graded by the 2 groups. One is by the final leader of the admissions office. One is graded by the alumni interviewer who actually met the applicants. And here, Asian Americans had 3.86%, which doesn't seem that much lower, but if you look at the 10th decile or 10 academic index decile, the smartest people among the applicants, they had the 10.29%, compared to the African American who almost had quadruple chances of having 2 or better on the overall rating. In the alumni interview overall rating, Asian American has the highest average percent of getting 2 or better overall rating, which gave me a suspicion that the admission office is trying to take off the points by their intention to bring down the Asian American admit rate. So I also modeled using some of the programming languages to make some scenarios which has a different admission policies using no Asian penalty, no African American Hispanic preference, and no racial preferences. If there was no Asian penalty, the total admit number of Asian American would increase to up to 16%. If there was no preference for African Americans and Hispanics, increase rate would boost up to 27%. If there was no racial preference, the increase rate would boost up to even 46%, which is a significant amount of change. So if we summarize this thing, Asian Americans are the ethnic group with the highest share in the applicants who receive 2 or better for academic extracurricular ratings, the lowest share in applicants who receive 2 or better for personal over ratings from the admissions office, and the ethnic group with the highest or second highest in applicants who receive 2 or better for personal and over ratings from alumni interviewers. And if there was no Asian penalty, and if there was no African or Hispanic American preference by Harvard, and if there was no racial preference, the admit rate of Asian would boost up to maximum 46%. So for the future studies, I want to delve into Harvard's preference in ALDC, which is recruited athletes, legacies, dean's interest list, and children of faculty and staff. And I also want to answer the question if there would be any significant change if the Harvard's racial distribution, if ALDC admits are treated as non-ALDC, which means the assumption that Harvard will do not have any preferences for the ALDC. I also want to research the coefficient of different factors, not only race, but gender, financial status, scores from the admission office, and Harvard admission process to determine which factors considered as the most significant variable to be admitted. So what I learned and why is this important? Harvard's class data failed to justify the stark disparity in the personal and over ratings to Asian Americans compared to other races. Considering the fact that the personal and over rating is treated as more subjective than the academic and extracurricular ratings, which could be more viewed as objective using SAT scores or their club activities. I can definitely say Harvard's explanation for the disparity. Harvard's explanation was not enough to cover the big disparity in personal and over ratings graded by admissions office and the alumni interviewers. I also learned that there should be more thorough explanation about to restrict the racial quotas and appropriate usage of race. And the reason why this project is considered to be important is, as it is mentioned in the title of the Civil Rights Act, every individual have an equal right to receive education. Anyone could be another Jews or Asian Americans. Now is the matter of the race, but in the future, maybe your child or some can be rejected just because of their, not only race, just because of their gender, sexual orientation, and just because they are disadvantaged. So I believe that making this right would contribute to the equality in the future society. So these are my works cited. Mostly I use the transcript from the case Students for Fair Admission versus Harvard, and I also use from my mentor, Professor Peter R.C. Diacono's report for the Students for Fair Admission side. And these are also another exhibits for works cited. I would like to thank my mentor, Duke Economic Professor Peter R.C. Diacono, for offering these amount of citations and work data. I also want to thank NCSSN and NCSSN Foundation Board to offering me a good opportunity to work in Duke Economics. I also want to thank Dr. Shoemaker for giving me a good recommendations on my presentations. Thank you. Any other questions?
Clap, I can't.
Yeah.
So I understand like the point of your presentation, but when you talk at the end, like your child could be not let in because they're disadvantaged, doesn't that also take into account the fact that minorities like Hispanics and African Americans are disadvantaged a lot of times in their level of education? So the affirmative action that like takes that into account is not always a bad thing. So how do you take that into account and also like not discriminate against Asian Americans?
So if it is affirmative action, the affirmative action was originally designed to protect the minorities, but if it was designed to protect minorities, it should cover all. It should not only cover African Americans or African Americans or the Hispanics. Asian Americans are considered to be as a minority, but ironically, they are now the victims of the affirmative action. So I would say I'm not trying to say that affirmative action should be totally gone, but there needs to be a definite change because the current system of the affirmative action does not cover whole entire races and whole entire minority people. Yes.
So like in light of this data, do you see the reduction of ALDC students like being admitted into Harvard under like greater scrutiny?
Wait, pardon?
The ALDC students,
Yes.
right? Do you see that the like their admissions like I guess rates like lowering because of like the disinformation?
I didn't fully understand what you meant.
So the ALDC students, right? They're I guess like you define them as like having higher priority over this over other like.
They generally do, because Harvard is trying to cover up their statement that the disparity happened between the races, between Asian American and other races, are happened not because of the race, but their preferences to the ALDC students. That's what they're using as their statement into the court case right now.
Good. Any advice for Daniel as he comes to sit down, and then we'll wrap up?
Yes. For some of like the OIR reports and stuff, I noticed that like you're like reading the questions in their entirety. I don't know if like that's necessarily necessary, cause like the responses of I guess the people answering them were like very short and like succinct, but like the questions were very like long and like I guess like the audience like might like lose attention during like that part. So maybe like just like summarize the question and then you can say what the response was.
I think that's a good idea. It was long.
Mhm.
I can't tell for sure. It's shut down, guys. Sahil saw me.
Yeah.
I got it on this phone, but I don't know what's wrong. Anyways, I think it's long because this was still 12:41
Oh.
with whatever it was before that. So anything to cut down would be helpful.
I thought including the conversation like is a really, really good idea because it like reminds you that this is a law thing. But yeah, do shorten it down and explain like the significance of the answers, because like I didn't really fully understand the situation and what they like fully state. Like go ahead and just accuse them of what their wrongdoings are. Like say it outright, very clear that Harvard is hiding this. Like say it in a very short, concise sentence before going into the conversation. Because I didn't really understand like what exactly I was supposed to take out of it, but like it is a good thing. It's like a different type of graphic almost to cut out a conversation in there. So you just kind of go over the significance of it a little bit more and what their answers meant that they were trying to say, really, even though they were concise. Would have been pretty helpful.
And I agree with that, but I'm wondering, like, even for Julia and Daniel, who are sort of in this kind of field, it's like, is it true in law that you're not supposed to necessarily break it down and say exactly what you're accusing them of because you're, like, putting the facts out to let people decide? If that's true, a compromise might be at least you need to say what you believe. Because a lot of times I felt like you left us hanging. Like and I think almost everyone does this actually. Even like in some of the biological data, it's like I see it and I see something went up over another. But what are you trying to say? Like, what does that mean?
I think your answer to the question that I asked you, you should put in the take-home slide because I think that cleared a lot up for me. Like you're just saying like, okay, so now we know this and we've proven it, and we don't want to get rid of affirmative action because I think you're kind of in some ways making it seem like you do, and there's still a lot of positives to affirmative action, but just saying like, just literally a sentence that says like Asian Americans are also minorities, but they're not being treated as such, and that's what we want, is to be treated the same as Hispanic and African American applicants. So, yeah.
And I'll say it shows two things. As a researcher, it shows two things. One is you have the courage to go out on a limb and say something that maybe you don't have exactly all the evidence exactly for, but you have the courage to choose a thing and just say it. Make an interpretation. You could be wrong. It's fine. That's the job of researchers. You read papers. They're not wishy-washy. They don't just give you the data. They have to market it. The second thing it shows is you have actually thought through with your own brain and you have, I know you have, I'm not picking, but to me, when you guys or any researcher says what they mean, it means they've actually thought it through to the end, really thought it through to the end, and collected the data to show it, and then looked back and said, where could I have been wrong? It's almost like you've already went through all of the things that people could hit you on, all the downfalls, but you still believe this thing. So intellectually and courageously is is really pinpointing what you're doing. And to me, that's when you raise to like another level as a researcher, especially if you can back it up. Because then people are going to harp on you more. You'll get more hard questions when you lay down and say, this is what I think it means. Then you give people a chance to actually have a really fun discussion, the people who are going to go against it. Sorry, we're over time. You guys both did fabulous.